everyone. A parameter is used to store values that could be used within queries. For example, let's say that we would like to keep the top 5 rows of the sales table. In that case, I would go to the Home tab, go to Keep Rows, select Keep Top Rows, and write down number 5, and click OK. Now let's say that I would like to make that number of rows to be kept dynamic, meaning that I could change that number whenever I like by just adding the number in a box instead of having to go to the query editor and double click this step and change the number from here. So in other words, in case I'd like to make changing this number easier, what should I do? In that case, we need a parameter. So to create a parameter, we need to go and click on Manage Parameters under the Home tab. Then we need to click on New. Give a name to the parameter we would create. Let's call it N rows. Give some description for this parameter if you like. It's not mandatory. We will come back to that box later, or that option that says required. Next, we need to define the type for the parameter. So the available types are pretty much the same as the column data types we have discussed earlier in this chapter. For our example, I need to set the type to be decimal number. Then I need to define the suggested values. We will come to that option later. For now, I will set the current value for the parameter to be 5 and hit OK. A new parameter will be created. So if I go back to the sales table, and over here I would replace number 5 with the name of the parameter I created and click OK. Then I would go to Manage Parameters and change this number to be, say, 10 and click OK. If I go back to the sales table, you would see that now we have 10 rows. Now if I change that number again to be just 1, now if I go back to the sales table, we would see that we have only 1 row. The great thing about using parameters is that I do not necessarily need to go to the query editor to change them. So if I go to the data view, for example, and if I select the drop-down menu for transform data, I can edit the parameter from here. So instead of 1, let's make it 10, for example, hit OK, and apply changes. So if I go to the sales table, I would have 10 rows here. Additionally, I can change parameters from Power BI Online without even having to open the report itself using Power BI Desktop. We will come to this part later when we talk about how to use Power BI Online. Now going back to the query editor and going to the parameter options here, if we select Manage Parameters, earlier I told you to ignore the option that says Required. This option is simply used to remind us whether we need to provide a value for this parameter or not. Depending on how you would use your parameter, it might be required or not required from your point of view for your specific use case to make that parameter value required to be provided. So if that required option is checked, I cannot, for example, leave the current value as blank. So if I try to hit OK, it will give me an error and it would say, please enter a value. So say I enter the value of 3, then I go to that parameter and try to leave it as blank. Then it will give me again an error saying please enter a value to remind me that I need to enter a value for that parameter. Going back to the Manage Parameters options, the next option we have already talked about the type of parameter, and the type of the parameter needs to be identical to the expected value by the query. For example, to set the number of rows, it makes sense that we need to pass a number to the query. Now if we define this parameter type as text and hit OK and go back to the sales table, we would get an error saying that Power BI cannot convert the value of 5 that is recorded as a text to type number. But if we go back and define the type as decimal number, we would face no problem. Going back to the manage parameters options, the next option we have is the suggested values. So if I keep it like this, if I choose any values, I can enter any value I want and it wouldn't suggest any values to me. But if I choose list of values and enter a few numbers, say 5, 10, and 15, and set the default value to be 5 and the current value to be 5 as well. Now I could of course enter any value I like, so I could enter 20 for example, which I haven't entered within the suggested values, and it would work okay. But you would notice that a drop-down menu has been added with the value suggested, with the value I have suggested while setting the parameter, so that I can easily choose between these values. Going back to the manage parameters options, we have one last option that says query. So if I choose this option, it would suggest me values that are derived from a query within Power BI or from a list within Power BI. In other words, instead of defining the suggested values manually from here, it will be suggested based on the result of a query. Let's take an example. For now, let us remove this step, the keep top rows. Now assuming that we would like to filter the sales quantity column to show only rows when the sales quantity is greater than any of the numbers listed here. So in that case, I would right click over the sales quantity column and select add as a new query. Then I would go to the home tab and select manage parameters and create a new parameter and call it sales quantity. For the type of this parameter, I would choose decimal number, and for the suggested values, I would choose query. Then when I click on this drop down, I would have the option to choose which query I would like to use to suggest values. As you can see, I only have the option to choose sales quantity because the query I need to choose must be a list, and we have already seen together how to convert the sales quantity column to be a list. So if I choose sales quantity, and for current value, let me set it to 5 for example. Then if I go to manage parameters, then if I go to edit parameters and try to edit the sales quantity parameter, the suggested values I would have are the values that are recorded within the sales quantity column. So for example, if I choose 4 and hit OK, and if I go back to the sales table and filter the sales quantity column to show only rows whenever the sales quantity is less than the parameter I have recently defined, which is the sales quantity parameter, and hit OK, it would return only rows when the sales quantity for these rows is less than the sales quantity number I've defined from this parameter here. And that's all we need to know about creating parameters in Power BI. See you in the next video. If you like this type of content, subscribe to our channel, hit like, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. And by the way, we also offer Power BI consulting and training services at www.powerbimaster.com. See you in the next video.